Hi everybody, I'm Melissa Cook, and we're here at Gossett Brothers Nursery in South Salem, New York, just across the Connecticut border. And this is a mom and pop nursery. It's a family-owned business. It's been here for about 30 years. And today we're going to talk about what happens if you come to the nursery knowing that you want to make a pot for your outdoor patio space. Let's say it's a partly shady space and you want to brighten it up a little bit. So what do you do? What do you do when you first come into a nursery? Well, this is the front of Gossett Brothers, and typically you'll see signage around the nursery that will tell you what's what and where it is. Sometimes things like sale items will be listed, and also all the sales associates will be able to tell you what's on sale that day, and typically you're going to be able to find some good bargains. Nurseries also are arranged in a pretty particular way. Plants, as you know, some of them like sun, some need shade. If it's in the sun, it probably needs sun. If it's in the shade, it probably needs shade. The other thing you want to know is whether a plant is one that's going to come back every year, that's called a perennial, or whether it's a plant that you're just planting for this year. The big difference is that perennials obviously are a good investment because they're going to come back every year, but in a container we may not want to use them because they have a pretty short bloom time. Annuals, and we're in front of the annual area here, tend to be the ones that you think of in containers because they're bright, they're colorful, there's a million different types of things to choose from. So this is usually a place where we start, but I do want to encourage you to think about perennials, because if you put some perennials in the pots with the annuals, it's something you can plant in your garden at the end of the season and you get more bang for your buck, and that's something that over the years I've come to actually rely on. You also have to think about, for example, if you're going to have a big party and you need the container to be super colorful, you're going to go a different way than if you want it to be something that's going to be more natural and something that you're going to enjoy through the whole season. So we have to think about how big plants are going to get, how much room they're going to need in the container, what type of container you feel like lugging around. There are lots of really wonderful lightweight containers now these days that you can buy and that you can leave outside in the winter. Most containers you want to bring in because they get beat up, and if they get ice and water in them in the wintertime, sometimes they'll crack. So just to protect your investment, even if a pot says you can leave it outside, you generally want to bring it in. So here at the nursery, this is our annuals, as I said. Our perennials, which are the ones that come back every year, are on the far side. And again, just keep in mind that if it's in the sun, it probably needs sun. If it's in the shade, it probably needs shade. So I come in here, and I don't have a container, not sure which direction to go. I first want to find out where the containers are in any given nursery. Usually they're grouped together, but sometimes you'll see them spread through the nursery with displays in them. Generally they are for sale, so if you see a container you love that has things in it, feel free to ask the sales associate if it's for sale. This is our containers. We've also got more terracotta containers inside. Oftentimes nurseries will put them inside because they tend to chip and crack and get weathered more quickly. So if you just like something basic like this, and I'm a big fan of these, a lot of times they'll be in an interior location. But for today, I'm thinking a couple of different directions. I think that for my particular home, it's not too contemporary, it's an old farmhouse, and so I want to think of a container that's going to go sort of with the decor. These are quite modern, but they also could fit into a contemporary, into a traditional motif. So I'm thinking about one of these. And these are those lightweight containers. You can tell because I can lift it with one hand. Watch that a container has a drainage hole in the bottom for these containers, because most plants don't want to get waterlogged. So you want to be sure that water, as you're watering it during the season, can drain out. I also like these, and these are heavy-duty cement containers, and look at the price. This little guy's only $25. So be sure to check, because depending on the company that these containers come from, you can end up with something very pricey or a great deal like this. At the station where I'm going to make the container, I have one of these, so I'm not going to lug either of these around now, but this gives you the overall picture. Because we're doing a partly shade container, we want to head to that shady area inside there. One thing I often say to my customers when they come in with a blank slate, they come in and they're just not sure what direction to go with their container, is to find something that you love and start there. It can be a foliage plant, it can be a bright color, it can be anything that you love. And think about the color palette too with your home. Something that's going to either contrast or something that's going to sort of blend beautifully and create a palette. For me, I always love coleus. These guys are grown mostly for their foliage, and they're great in containers. They also, if you play your cards right, they can be wintered over as houseplants. And I often will think about that when I'm creating containers. Is it something that's perennial that I can plant in my garden? Or is it something I might keep as a houseplant inside? And I have several friends whose containers each year come from houseplants that they winter over and then go out for the summer. So I love this coleus. And I think with those containers I was looking at with the gray and the chartreusey green, I think these will sort of pop against the color of the container. I love the purple on the leaf too, so I'm going to be thinking about purples, blues, and something, maybe something white that's going to work with these. So we'll start with these in our box. And I'm kind of looking along here. Another plant that I love is this. How could you resist this? In shade, finding blue is not an easy thing. Many shade plants just tend not to be in that blue range. And so for me, this gorgeous deep indigo blue, I think is something that I definitely want to try to use. And I think, depending on how I do things, that this will work well. This is called lobelia. This again is an annual, and it comes in lots of shades of blue and white. So I'm thinking that, remember in a container too, you're thinking about, you've probably heard the old adage, you want something tall, you want something to be kind of at the middle level, and you want something to trail. So I'm thinking that these lobelia, and I can always ask an associate, somebody who works at the nursery, but these appear to me to be something I could either use in the middle and they'll kind of intersperse, or I can get them to trail. You can even plant things a little bit tipped in a pot if you want to get them to trail more than they ordinarily would. So even if this were not a trailing one, I could make it trail. So I've got a couple of plants that I really love here, the coleus and the lobelia. And as I said, the lobelia I can either use in the center of the pot as sort of fluff in the center, or I can use it by tipping it sideways so that it's going to trail over the side. I know about these plants that the lobelia is going to want a fair amount of water. So one thing I also want to think about in doing my container is to put plants that like similar situations as far as moisture. I don't want to put desert plants, succulents, things like that in with plants that are going to want a lot of moisture. So again, as a newbie coming into a nursery, that's something that I want to ask the sales associates, and that when I'm putting my container together or when I have my box together, I can even have them review it and just take a look and see if the plants I've chosen work together. And actually with my customers, I do that pretty frequently and will suggest a substitution in a similar color or style. So I've got these two, but I'm thinking I want something, because it's a woodland container, I want it to say woodland, and I'm thinking ferns. I could either go into the greenhouse and pick a fern, a Boston fern, something like that inside, a button fern, or I could do what I was talking about before and be smart and buy a perennial that will come back next year, and that after the container is done at the end of the season when the first frost hits, I can put that fern right in my woodland garden. And so I think that's the direction I want to go. So as I'm walking here in the annuals, I'm going to continue to just look and see if anything else catches my eye. Because at this point, and I shop like this anyway, I put a lot of stuff in my cart, and at the end I edit and I decide what I do and don't want. Because I don't have the pot right here too, I don't know how much I'm going to be able to stuff in, and I don't know what's going to look best. So at this point I'm still pretty open, but I'm looking for things I like and that say woodland. Notice too, and this is a shortcut for hanging baskets, if you don't feel like doing all of this creative work yourself, if you feel a little intimidated, oftentimes nurseries will have these mixed baskets of material. Often they're labeled. For example, this one is labeled that it wants full shade, so they're labeled according to what they want. You don't be put off by the fact that it's in a hanging basket. All you do is pull those hangers off and plop it right in the pot that you have existing, and you're good to go. Sometimes, now I do feel like I'm in the woodland. Thinking about something like this, because it has that chartreusey leaf. This is called a coral bell. It will come back every year. It's grown mostly for the foliage as opposed to the blossoms. This is really all the blossom does. But one of the great things about the coral bell, or heuchera is the botanical name, look at all the colors. In the last few years, there's been a boom of growing these and coming up with new leaf colors. And it's something that you can use into the fall. Again, it's perennial, so it goes right in the garden at the end of the season. So I'm going to pull one of those too. And now I'm heading into the ferns, which are my favorites. This is the fern that I immediately thought of when I pulled this coleus, because I was thinking with that purple on the underside and on the top and that sort of frosting that it might work really well with this. So I think I'm going to pull a couple of these. And another fern that I love is called a maidenhair fern. And some of you may have grown those inside as a houseplant. They are super tough to grow as houseplants because they need a lot of humidity. But I'm thinking for my woodland pot, it might be perfect and it might give me some height. So I'm going to grab one of those. And again, this is a perennial maidenhair fern. As delicate as it looks, this thing is tough as nails, and it will come back every winter. I have a stand of these in my garden. Many of these woodland plants, and again, as we said with perennials, they have a fairly short period of bloom, so usually no more than 3 weeks to a month. So if I'm having a big party and I want the container to be very colorful, this may not be the way to go. But if I want something that's going to be cost efficient and look very woodlandy, these would be. So I could have that lobelia, the blue flower, as a spiller, the part that spills over the edge. I'm thinking to myself that I might like something that's even more accustomed to being trailing. And this is another perennial. This is called lamium, or dead nettle. Look in nurseries for different size pots. Oftentimes you're going to see perennials in 1 gallon pots, which is this size, or the size of that maidenhair fern that I just picked up. But you can also find perennials in these small containers, and sometimes that's a perfect fit for a pot because you're not trying to cram a big root ball into a container. So I like this, and I'm thinking it will pull in, because remember I'm thinking of my color palette. I think that'll look nice with that frosted Japanese painted fern, which is what this is. So I'm going to pull a couple of those, and this is looking pretty good to me. Also, feel free, when you're picking a plant, feel free to pick the best one. You're the shopper. So you can pull them out, and sometimes when they're in these trays, there'll be a real difference. Sometimes one will have not gotten as much water as another. So you can compare and find the one that perfectly is going to suit your pot. And be sure to pick the best one. Take the time to look at them closely. These, for example, look like they are newer arrivals, so they just haven't grown as much. This guy, I think, is going to make more impact, so I'm going to go with this one. These plants here are kind of the middle guys as far as light needs. You can see they're sort of half covered, half not. And I was thinking there's a geranium down here that might look nice in the pot as well. I've got the blue. This one is Roseanne, and this is a geranium that has really hit the ground running in the past few years, and it flowers most of the season. It looks great planted under things like roses, where it will form sort of a petticoat at the bottom and sort of cover up where the plant is planted in the ground. So I'm going to pull one of these. So this looks like my selection for right now. And so let's go over and we'll take a look at how to put it all together. I just sort of set aside this little area. Some nurseries, too, will actually, if you bring in a container, we obviously have chosen a couple today, have come in without anything. But if you bring a container in, many nurseries have a service where they will plant them up for you. Often you will work with a sales associate to choose the plant material that's going to go in. You can even say to them sometimes, I don't know, I want bright colors, I know I want red for sun, and they'll choose something. I have one other plant here that I was considering, and you can see why. Look at the beautiful colors. It's got that purple and green. This is called an elephant ear, again for obvious reasons. But I decided, because I had in my mind from the beginning that I wanted a woodland container. This looks tropical to me. This looks like something I would see in the Caribbean. And so I don't think it quite fits with what I'm trying to put together here. But everybody's different, and you can do something that's sort of eclectic. And if you like the elephant ear, it's your pot, stick it in there. No, Martha Stewart is not coming over, and so you can put in whatever you like. So I've got my Coast of Maine soil here. This is the Coast of Maine potting soil, and ever since I personally have started using this, my pots, and I say this completely honestly, my pots have never been better. This is the best potting soil. We said to make sure we've got a drainage hole in the bottom of the pot. Got one here, and I think I'm going to go with this pot because I like that Celtic design. And again, I have a farmhouse, so I think that's going to look weathered and old-fashioned. I just like this one because it's lightweight, but let's put that to the side. So this is really about as simple as it gets. This is not rocket science. We're going to take the soil, we're going to put it in there, and then we're going to put the plants in there. Some soils that you buy are going to have food in them and all kinds of other nonsense. What I like about Coast of Maine is that it's organic. It's just, you can see the quality of the soil. And the amendments to it are natural and wonderful for the plants. I want to think about the angle from which I'm going to see this pot. Is it going to be something that people are going to be walking all around 360, or is it going to be something that I have sitting up next to something? In my case, the place where I'm thinking about it is going to be up next to something, so I'm going to imagine that this is the back and this is the front. I'm going to take my fern, and it's nice to lay them out first in the pot before you actually start planting, because then you can see how much you're going to be able to cram in there. And I always end up with too much. Oftentimes, too, those tags, as I said, are going to have information about how tall something's going to get. So I don't want, for example, if this thing is going to get to be 24 inches tall, I don't want to put it in front of the fern that's going to stay at 12, because eventually it's going to look like, you know, Godzilla stomping on New York City. So you want to think about those kinds of things too. I definitely want to get, and I pulled two sizes of this painted fern. This is the 1 quart, because I thought I might need something that big in the pot. I think this is going to be a better fit. And I think I want the fern kind of spilling out a little bit. Now I want to get
it's not
those
smiling,
gorgeous...
Melissa.
Now I want to get those gorgeous lobelia in the center here. And I have to decide, now that I have this guy that trails, whether I want to try to put the lobelia in the center or have it trail. I think I want it in the center. I think I want it to kind of grow in and be sort of a filler in the center, and then have my lobelia spilling down. Now you can see I'm stuffing this pretty full, and it's really a decision about whether I want to keep this 1 quart maidenhair, but I think I do, because I think I love the airiness of it. So I am going to keep it, and I'm going to make other decisions, and this is what I mean about editing. I had also pulled these little begonias because they like shade, and I thought maybe some white in here would be nice. I just don't know if I have room for them. If I were having a party and I wanted this container to be more festive and more flower-filled, I might make a decision even. I don't know what I would pull, but I might have a couple of these in there and use the begonias just so that there would be more flowers to look at. Because this is mostly foliage in this container. So now I've eliminated these guys. I also pulled the geranium, as you remember, and I was thinking that might be something, again, if I were having a party and I wanted lots of color, that I could stick in there, but I think it's just going to be too big. So let's start potting this up. A lot of times, best way to get a plant out of a pot, if it's moist, it's not going to be a problem. You're basically just going to give it a squeeze and kind of gently tip it. It probably will come right out. In this case, you can see the roots all along the outside here. The best thing to do is to try to separate those a little bit. It's just going to give the plant, remember that the roots are absorbing water, so the more exposure they have and the more surface area contact they have with the soil, the better off that absorption is going to be. So I'm going to just, and I don't garden with gloves, I'm one of those hardcore guerrilla container gardeners, and my nails show it, but I'm just going to pull this guy apart a little bit. I can even, if I want to, pull some of those roots off the bottom, and sometimes I do that just to make a little more space. I'm just gonna, you want to plant most plants, people ask me this, mostly you want to plant plants at the level they are in the pot. So if it's to here, you kind of want to work with that as your level, as opposed to burying it deeper or having it, you know, sitting up on top. Just try to get it at about the level that it was in its initial pot. These guys are easier to plant, of course, because they're smaller. Some plants, and you'll feel them when you're taking them out, you do have to be a little bit careful, a little bit delicate. I tend to be sort of a bulldozer sometimes and break things. So you have to be gentle, like you're handling a tiny baby chick. And again, you can see the root system. This is the sign of a good root system. It's not bound and choking it, but it's enough so that you know the plant is healthy and happy and well rooted. So I think I'm going to put him here. Next, I want to get that gorgeous lobelia right in the center. And this guy's a little dry, so I'm going to want to make sure that when I finish the planter, that I give it a nice drink of water. And this is a little bit root bound, you can see. So what I'm going to do, believe it or not, I know it looks drastic, but I'm just going to pull those right off the bottom and then gently separate this. Because what it's going to do is stimulate the plant to start putting roots down from the bottom in this container as opposed to fighting with those. So let's stick you right here. And I may move it depending on how it looks from the front because I'm doing this backwards. Next, we're going to stick it in the Japanese painted fern. And this is a personal note too. Some people, there's actually very differing opinions on how full you should plant your containers. People who are more patient than I am don't plant them as full as this because they know the plants are going to grow and it gives everybody leg room and a chance to spread. I want immediate gratification, so I stuff them full and so they look great from minute one, as opposed to looking like a nursery until the middle of July. A nursery meaning for baby plants that are just sort of swimming in the deep end of a pool that's way too big for them. So I do stuff things. And then finally, let's get this lamium in. And remember, this is a perennial. This is going to come back next year. This is a perennial. This is going to come back next year. And this is. So out of 5 plants I have in here, 3 of them are perennials. So I'm thinking I'm spending my money wisely, which means I can buy more of those things that I rejected, even though I wanted them in a container. I know. I can imagine like an overdub of like screaming on top of screaming plants as I pull those off. It's good for them. It really is. And this guy goes right in the front. And now I'm going to just take a look-see from the front. Because remember, we said that this is a container that's going to be viewed from one direction, from the head on, as opposed to walking around it. Because in the back, it's going to have sort of a flat sort of affect. And just like, you're tweaking ensembles, at least fashion ensembles, at least some people do, I do not. We want to just tweak this and make sure everybody is tucked in. Then I'm just going to go ahead and give this guy a drink and water everybody in, because remember the lobelia was a little bit dry. And there's my container.